Gosh, Don's got notes.
Always. I
Yes.
can't. I have to be prepared. Yeah.
Me too. I don't think I actually took notes on this one because I was watching this with my wife, and I took some mental notes. I think
Mm-hmm.
so. I'm going to rely on the experts here and the newbie, much like me, Mike. This is a first time discussing. Hey, let's rewind the tape. What are we discussing? Because we're live
Right.
now. It's Star Wars Day, everybody. Happy May the 4th to all those who celebrate. And we are talking about a movie about a young, kind of rebellious guy named Luke. He has to work on a farm of sorts. Has real problem
Scruffy nerf
with
herder.
authority.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
We are, of course, talking about Cool Hand Luke from 1967, not 1977 Star Wars.
Cool Hand
A
Luke
little switcheroo.
Skywalker. Yeah.
Cool Hand Luke Skywalker. I want to see Mark Hamill eat all those eggs.
Oh,
But
see Grogu eat all those
That's
eggs.
probably. I mean, that's probably where
No,
he got the
no,
where
no.
he milked the thing in Last Jedi. That's probably where he got the eggs from.
oh God,
Fair
someone's
point.
got to do a mashup of Paul Newman eating the eggs and Luke getting the milk, and a
Yeah.
hometown breakfast.
Can we get a Lalo Schifrin score in the back to back that? That'd be amazing.
Oh
yeah.
Yes.
You also
You
did
mean
score one of George Lucas's movies, THX 1138.
Lalo did that one? I did not know that.
Yeah.
Well, I like to think of it as bacta to bacta. Anyhow, I also want to say, it's May the 4th. This is also a tip of the hat to the other Luke. My youngest turned 6 today. Yes, he is a Star Wars Day baby.
Congrats.
How about that?
Yeah. So, but he has not watched Cool Hand Luke. There will be no interjection of, hey, what did you think of this movie, young whippersnapper? You want to become a professional car washer now? I certainly
like
did.
the part where he hit the parking meters. Yeah, I'm sure that kid will love it. Yeah.
All right, so let's dive into this. Shameless plug, although this is not an official endorsement, but Warner Brothers did recently put out a 4K edition of Cool Hand Luke, and it looks great. I don't have anything to compare it to because this is my first time watching it, along with Mike Crowley of You'll Probably Agree, Don Shanahan of Film Obsessive and Cinephile Hissy Fit podcast, and the one that started it all. Every movie has a lesson. Almost forgot it there. It's late for me.
It's all right.
How many times have you seen this?
I've seen this probably a half dozen times at this point here. So
wow. Okay.
couple.
So
yeah,
half dozen times, half dozen eggs. There's gonna be a lot of egg references tonight. And Jeff York of The Establishing Shot. This is gonna be fun because you've said this is one of your favorite films of all time. So
I've heard
how many times have you seen
talk about this finally?
Probably 10.
10. Okay. I want to get this out of the way because this might just be a love fest. There might be some contradictory opinions. I just want to kind of get high level opinions. Jeff and Don, suffice it to say, you're not hate watching this thing. So
No.
Mike, what did you think of Cool Hand Luke? Just kind of high level.
Well, it's funny. I think you said in the email it's like a chain gang version of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yep.
And I didn't get how it was until we got towards the last. Oh, should I spoil it or? But
wait, not yet. Not yet. We're going to be professional here. For this 50, 60-year-old movie, whatever it is.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we're talking spoilers now.
Spoilers.
Yeah, when you get to the final end of it, where you see how they actually broke Luke, but he was still defiant until the end.
Mm-hmm.
It was a movie where I'm like, oh my God, this is exactly like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's about somebody who is a rebel who doesn't adhere to what the authorities say, who always is cool, calm, and collected, and someone that everybody looks up to. And of course, what happens to him in the end is the mechanizations of the system that run the prison board, let's say, they end up breaking Luke, just like how in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when Jack Nicholson's character, R.P. McMurphy.
R.P. McMurphy.
Yeah.
McMurphy.
Yeah, not Murphy from RoboCop, but R.P. McMurphy. Although that'd be a great sort of.
I want to see that movie.
Are you talking about Peter Weller in Cuckoo's Nest or RoboCop in Cuckoo's Nest? Because I'm there for either one.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
but it's about how one person that everyone. Yeah, it's about a man against the system, and it's very much that kind of tale. And yeah, I can see why it has gotten so many accolades over the years because those last 30 minutes really kind of hook you in, because you see how they're going to break this guy. This isn't like the Shawshank Redemption where they're going to get away and everyone's going to be happy. No, this is really a movie that is emblematic of its time, because like the movies like from the 60s to the 70s, those were the best cinema that we had. And this is certainly one of those movies that I could see how it would gain such a following. You know, that wasn't it like completely in the very beginning, because I'm like, okay, I see this guy rabble rousing and he's eating 50 eggs. That's interesting, but where's this going? But then when you see where it goes, it's worth that journey.
Yeah, very much so. And the other Cuckoo's Nest connection I drew is that much like McMurphy, he gets institutionalized. He doesn't really seem to belong there. His biggest crime, or his biggest like mental disability, I guess, if that's probably the wrong word to use, is his sort of anti-authoritarian streak. He doesn't have the same degree of severe problems that the other people he's locked in with. And with Paul Newman, he's in this chain gang, I guess South Florida or wherever prison,
Florida, right?
Working the roads with some hardened criminals. He gets busted for he gets 2 years for ripping off the tops of parking meters, which is how we meet him. It's not even clear. I don't even think he was robbing the parking meters. He's just vandalizing them, which was fascinating to me. And it's reminded me of a movie that I talked about also recently, which is Rebel Without a Cause. It has essentially the same opening shot of our main hero kind of drunkenly stumbling about town doing something he shouldn't and getting picked up by the cops. Now they go in different directions, but it is kind of amazing how these Warner Brothers kind of films of that 50s and 60s, they're interested in sort of similar themes, but also they're interested in the artistry of film. This is the kind of thing that I immediately went back to my high school film class where we're studying motifs and things. The first image we see of in Cool Hand Luke, I believe, is the red sign with the white lettering saying violation. And the last shot of the movie, I believe, is the stop sign going across the railroad tracks or something, that kind of symmetry, like George Lucas, who we were talking about before we went live. It's like poetry, it rhymes. But Don, why don't you give the synopsis of Cool Hand Luke? What the hell are we talking about here tonight?
Sure. No. So you have Luke. What's his last name?
Jackson.
Jackson.
I was going to say McMurphy, but
yeah, I know, right? No,
Lucas
so you're right.
Jackson.
We framed up the start. You have Luke Jackson, who is pinched for vandalizing parking meters and probably being a bit of a drunken derelict with it. He's put on a 2-year sentence with a Florida chain gang at a prison work camp, and he's in there with people who are kind of a good mix of people that are middle-aged men who really have nothing to kind of go for and do. They're in there, like you said, for different sentences and whatnot. And it's about how this guy and his personality mesh with some of the good old boys that are there, but also at the same time, how does he beat the how does he kind of acclimate himself and therefore kind of work around the the institutionalization, I guess is what you want to say. Like, it is pretty crappy work. It is pretty crappy conditions. It's a hot, sweaty Florida thing. And how can he make the best of his time, or at least kind of find his place to fit in? What can he do to kind of I don't want to say motivate, because he's not there to be like, a revolutionary leader. Like, hey guys, let's all get out of here. It's not that movie. But he's also, I like the way Mike brought up Shawshank Redemption. He's not Andy Dufresne either, where he's not trying to just melt into the background and get through his time. He's like, you could tell there's disquiet in him about what he wants to do. So hijinks ensue in terms of just the male camaraderie that develops between his personality matching with the other convicts, and what the authority does and what the work is out there to do to just kind of what they do with their time, so to speak, there and all that. And at some point, Newman gets it in his mind, like, I've been here long enough. I don't think this is, gonna work for me, which, petty nitpick, dude, it's just 2 years. You're gonna make it. Like, just write it up, buddy. It'd be different if he was in there like Andy Dufresne for 20 years. Or if it was Chris Pratt on Passengers, where he's got an 80-year death sentence, and after 6 months, he's like, I'm so sad. Dude, it's been 6 months. Jennifer Lawrence will be there. Anyway, no, I digress. But no,
don't go knocking Passengers, sir. We're gonna duke it out at one point in the future. Again,
I know.
Yes.
No. But our guy Luke Jackson gets it in his mind to maybe make a run for it, and how that will turn out for him, how that will turn out for his peers, who whether they are look at him as being like, "What are you doing? You're crazy," or if they are really on the same wavelength of, "Hey, maybe you're onto something," and how that will turn out for a guy set 1950s Florida and what the prison system is, what a man is worth down in that time period, a war hero at that, and yeah, how will that all turn out for a guy who clearly, I don't want to say has a death wish by any means, but just has that I'm gonna, well, kind of like his boxing match with Kenny. He's the kind of guy, literally and figuratively, who will go down swinging. He will not stay down. He will not bend to things if he can't wiggle his way out of it from there. So and that's a fascinating thing to see portrayed on screen in this time period and era, reflecting on the time period and era they shoot with, and with a movie stars doing this, because this is a rough and tumble, dirty anti-hero part for a guy who's normally a smiling, great Hollywood leading man who, other than HUD, doesn't really play a villain ever. Not that he's a villain of this story, but he's still a con. He's still an asshole. So that kind of thing.
Now, you mentioned, is this I was having trouble placing it. Again, it's probably because it's the first time I'm watching it. You said it was the 1950s. Where is that kind of mentioned? Because I got the feeling that it was the 50s, but it was made in 67. So I don't know.
Made in 67. I think the book sets this a couple years after the Korean War is my guess, where he got his accolades as a soldier. So my guess is this is like 57. I'm also trying to judge it by the cars and fashion and music a little bit, where it's hard to kind of I wasn't there in 57 to know, but I think the book puts this in the 50s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, actually he's a World War II hero in the book.
Well, then even more. Like if this all of a sudden period to if this is 1954,
well, that makes sense, because WW2 ended in 45. So I mean, this is another thing I was thinking about with Rebel Without a Cause. This idea that, because that was also the early 1950s when that was set. The idea of the big war, the Great War, we defeated evil globally, and you come back and like, okay, so what's next? You've got this kind of lost generation of teenagers. You've got all these kind of broken, men coming back from all the atrocities that they've seen and perhaps had to do. So what's next? You've got the nifty 50s. Can you really believe in that? It just seems like there's this whole gap of kind of stuck people. And I felt like all of the people that Luke was locked up with kind of fell into that mold. I mean, they're not just like vicious monsters or animals, right? They all have some degree of intelligence, and you're kind of wondering, under different circumstances, like, could they just be walking around out in the world?
But we're also not like shouting the era that we're in the way like Rebel Without a Cause. We have the greaser. I don't want to say the full greaser. This isn't the wild one or anything, but like you're unabashedly showing your 50s teenage sensibilities and whatnot. Whereas this one, you're kind of in a bit of a podunk vortex of like, this is South Florida. Like we don't have beatniks and greasers and a stereotype person here, a stereotype person there. Like if this was made today, we'd have the rainbow array of like, always somebody from Cleveland, always somebody from Pittsburgh. You'd have a fake Floridian, you'd have a New Yorker, you'd have a token black guy. None of that's here. You just have this weird little podunk vortex of just kind of the same, like you said, the same kind of people, probably about the same meager, crappy circumstances and where they put themselves. And because the other thing is, like, Luke is an enigma. Other than the war hero talk we get on his resume when he's lining up for prison, we don't know a damn thing about him. We don't know if he's married, kids, what he did for work. None of that stuff. Like this, he might as well be John Miller from Saving Private Ryan at this point. So,
well, we do know that I can assume that he has a way with the ladies, because there was a particular passage towards the middle end of the film that I'm gonna need your help understanding here, guys. Because at one point he does escape, and it's unclear. At least I thought he was gone for a while, because at one point the guys in the prison, they open up a magazine and they see this picture of him standing between these two lovely ladies, almost like he was in Playboy or like Time magazine or something like that, almost like an ad. And then very shortly after he comes, they haul him back in and just kind of throw him back in into the stir. What was that all about? What did I miss there?
Oh, like he said, then he later says he had the photo made up. So like,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
one, where do you go? Two, how do you have the means? How much time were you out? Because again, passage of time isn't super duper clear in the movie. Yeah, how do you know those ladies? How do you have a suit? Like, what were you? What are you? We hear about the other guy cutting checks, like the white collar crime guy that's in prison. We don't hear a lot about other people's sentences, but yeah, good question, fair question.
It's
Jeff,
kind
what
of
do you make of it?
I think it's kind of the charm and mystery of Luke in essentially that we don't know a great deal about his backstory other than he's a war hero. And he certainly is nonconformist. Where that comes from, I would argue that what Don Pierce, when he wrote that in 65, was probably, using a little bit what was happening in the 50s and 60s, where I think so much of America was changing post-war, civil rights, women's rights, the changing values of sex, even what roles men play in sort of the family or the non-family divorce. Those things are becoming topics now that for the first half of the century really were not. I mean, it was much more of a traditional society in most respects. So my guess is he was sort of commenting on that. But I think in the same token, Luke is sort of anything we want to maybe put upon him to sort of be representing there, because I think he is an enigma by design in that he is a symbol. I think he, in some respects, is a symbol in a sort of Messiah way, that he's sort of saving these men from just accepting their lot. I know that's a stretch, but there's tons of creative imagery that is very Christ-like in it. When he's done eating those eggs, he's like this on the table.
Oh yeah.
And at one point where he's talking to God is very much like Jesus talking to God when he's on the cross. I mean, that was very much intentional, because by that point we know he's probably doomed. He can't get away with escaping 3 times. But I think, as far as the magazine goes, how he did it exactly, who knows? It might have been faked. It might have been one of those things where you go into a novelty shop and they put a fake page in a magazine and make it look like it's your part of Time or Look or whatever the hell it was at the time. I love the fact that we don't kind of know, but that somehow he wanted to kind of keep up his image to them, or at least let them know, hey, I'm out and I'm having a good time here, wishing you were here, even though, he gets caught again and then cops to not really that he faked it. So whether he's with those women or not, who knows? But my guess is he was, but he probably faked putting it in the magazine.
Yeah.
But I also think it's an interesting thing to your question about who is Luke. In most movies, as you well know, in any story, really, the main character has the arc. He's the one who changes in the course of the story. Luke doesn't change here. It's the people around him who change. He stays constant. He is a nonconformist, a charmer, kind of a devil-may-care character. And he comes into this and sees on both sides these people who are adhering to these rules that he thinks are bullshit, and he wants to shake up the group a little bit. And he does that demonstrably on both. I mean, Strother Martin, as the captain's famous line about what we have here is failure to communicate. He keeps saying it all the time because Luke is the one who doesn't get it. He's not understanding what they're telling him. You must be down. You are a dog. You're no longer a man. And he's like, hey, I'm just a man who got picked up for something stupid. And you're kind of, following all these crazy rules that don't really apply anymore in this world that has the nuclear threat and women joining the workforce and, people rebelling against us, treating blacks as second-class citizens, which all became the definition of the 50s and 60s. So I think in some respects that makes Luke a character in need of a big star like Paul Newman, because he's got to be a charmer who can immediately get us on his side, because it's Paul Newman. Because to Don's point, when you look at what he's done, he's an agitator, but he's a good agitator because these people need some shaking up.
I always like that line. I mean, obviously the failure to communicate line is iconic. It's what, number 11 on the AFI list of quotes, but I like the rest of that speech that really never gets said. Like the next line after it is like, some men you just can't reach.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's amazing how well the uppity captain that we think is completely clueless and just ruling on high probably pegs this guy straight on in the bullseye. We're just going to keep putting chains on you till you screw up some more.
But don't you think it's also interesting? I don't want to intercede and get your next question, Ian, but I think it's also interesting too how the subtlety is there for other people to be sort of questioning authority, whether they believe it or not. I mean, when Clifton James does that famous thing like, get caught doing this, but not in the box, not in the box. They're going through it by rote. They're just kind of accepting their lot. And to your point, Luke comes in and says, I can defeat, this guy who's 60 pounds bigger than me in a boxing match, and he doesn't beat him, but he doesn't go down either, and then gets him to Dragline to like him and kind of become his almost sidekick in a way. So I think he's, I tell you, the movie, it reminded me more than some of the ones you mentioned, as good as those are as comparisons. It reminded me actually a lot of Stalag 17, if you've ever seen that movie, where William Holden is.
I've not seen that yet.
Well, long story short, it's about a POW camp for enlisted American GIs, and he's the nonconformist. He's the guy that doesn't go along with all their shit and their habits and their rules and this kind of structure they have. He's like, hey, we're in a prison camp. I'm out for myself. If I can get a bar of soap or an egg by wheeling and dealing with this, I'm going to do so. Anyway, nobody likes him, but he ends up changing them and making them understand his point of view and his sort of take on how to act to survive and actually thrive in this area. Even though it's under the worst of circumstances. And I think that's kind of the same story in a way here. And both are sort of anti-heroes before that became sort of the really big thing. And both played by very well-liked Hollywood leading men who, in some respects, as they said, only Nixon could go to China because he was a commie fighter. Only a Bill Holden or a Paul Newman could play these really sort of, on the paper, unlikable anti-heroes, but make them likable and understand why people would want to follow them or change accordingly.
Like who's this guy today? Clooney's too old.
An actor?
Yeah, like Clooney's too old. Who could play the charm of this part convincingly?
Question, yeah, because
I think Clooney could do it, but it's too old and it had to be 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But
it's funny because I'm reading Out of Sight right now, which is also about people in a Florida prison.
Yeah. Yes. That book is
God love Elmer Leonard.
The movie lists in that book, Chef Kiss perfectly. So
dude, it occurs to me, sidebar, because I'm gonna be talking about this in a couple of weeks
with the book.
Please call us.
Right? Yeah.
I love that.
Well,
movie.
no, I'm doing a one-on-one with Cole, but
you got a good show there.
I saw Out of Sight several times back in '98, but I don't think I've watched it since '98. But reading the book, even though they changed some stuff with the characters, like it's pretty much an all-white book, but then you've got they change out Jennifer Lopez and Ving Rhames. I'm like remembering scenes in the movie as I'm reading them in the novel. It's amazing how movies can stick with you. They can be that sticky even after 25 years. But so Cool Hand Luke as a film, I just want to say it was remarkable how, I mean, it held my attention. It made me really want to know more about these characters, especially one who's the biggest enigma. And I think one of the biggest, I just wanted a whole series about this guy's life leading up to this prison thing. The scene with his mom, when she comes to visit at the prison and she's, dying. This is like the last time that she's going to see him, and he can't, not that they have a lot of love or affection. They've definitely had a strained relationship, but he has to stand outside her carriage, and he can't even walk around the side to give her a hug or whatever, because he's being watched by people with enormous guns. It's such, and she's keeping up this kind of tough as nails sort of demeanor. But then when he goes back inside and she just completely breaks down. I mean, there's so many layers to this just being a men in prison movie. I think it helps that there is a different kind of a female presence in the movie, because up until that point, the only character we got was the warden's wife or someone's wife.
Girl.
So there's some girl washing her car. Whew. And I was watching this with my wife, and I got embarrassed. I'm like, yeah, this is kind of what guys are like.
It is what guys are
like.
But
the wonderful thing about that scene is, maybe in some respects it doesn't play politically correct today, is that's all they had. That was the only touch with humanity. Absolutely. And here it is, this utter tease that they can't touch, and all they can do is sort of talk their drool, if you will.
It's true.
And that's the thing. It's a very sad scene, despite being funny too.
Yeah.
But
go ahead, Mike.
Oh no, it was the only thing that kept them going and kept them alive, just because I think if I ever get out of prison or I make it through this, maybe I can get that. Is that exactly the most realistic mindset? No. But it's something for them to hold on to. That's what kind of made that scene pretty human.
Also, you see the different range of ogling reactions. I know it's not the most PC scene, but how Newman plays that scene, how Kennedy plays that scene, how Hopper plays that scene, how every little character, how I don't want to say it's the horn dog meter scene, but like you see a great difference between who's into it, who's not into it, who's tough enough with integrity inside to hold it together, and who's just nope, just flapping the gums. And
Well,
we can see that in Kennedy for sure and whatnot, you know.
And that's the one thing I think is interesting about Luke as a man amongst all these much worse men,
Oh,
is
yeah.
he's actually the man who sort of walks the walk in addition to talking the talk. A lot of them are big game, a little big talk, and they're kind of menacing and stuff, but he puts his money where his mouth is against Kennedy, against the authorities, against the boss with the reflective sunglasses, the man with no eyes, and everybody else is pretty kowtowing at the end of the day and kind of pathetic for that. And by the end, George Kennedy's in leg irons, but he's a better man for knowing Luke. And he was all kind of bluster in all the showy ways, but not necessarily in the ways that kind of Luke helped him understand that even though we're prisoners, we're still men, we're still people. We can stand up for rights, even though we're sort of being turned into dogs, even when mom comes to visit and you can't even touch your mom.
Well, and I think you open up so many avenues there. I just want to close out on the car washing scene real quick. No, it's good.
Go ahead, yeah.
But I was going to say it's, we've said here, I don't necessarily know that I disagree, but I don't think it's as easy as saying this isn't a politically correct scene with the car wash, because in one vein you could say, yeah, it's this very busty blonde lady completely wet and soaping up her car, and all these guys are like, freaking out over her. But I mean, who's really yes, they are objectifying her, but it's not in a way that the audience is supposed to latch onto and say, yes, I'm right there with them. This is the cool way to act. I'm getting turned on by this woman, because it's not like she, it's so hot, I got to take my top off and get all soapy and wash the car. It's pretty chaste for what they end up, for what they're trying to accomplish there. But yeah, I think it does say something about the base nature of these men, and not necessarily that's like how all men are, although I made that crack at the beginning, but just this idea that when you strip away dignity, on top of whatever they may have done to themselves to take away their humanity or dignity that got them into this situation in the first place, that system is grounding them down further and bringing out more of this animalistic, tribalistic nature. I don't want to know what some of these cats would do if they got out of prison and came across this woman washing her car.
I agree.
But the George Kennedy arc, he plays a character named Dragline. Everybody in this movie, all the prisoners have cool nicknames that I think Dragline kind of assigns to them.
Yep,
that's sort of
they're all G.I. Joe characters.
He names Cool and Luke.
Right, but he doesn't get a nickname until he's been there a while, partially because he's the guy who's sort of challenging Dragline's authority. He's top dog in this prison camp, which is hilarious to me because I don't recall seeing George Kennedy in much besides the Naked Gun movies. So to see him playing,
didn't you see him pull that plane out of the snow in the airport?
Well, to hear Kennedy tell it, he's that guy who's like, this movie opened up so much for you, not just with pay and great roles because you won an Oscar for it, but like he was always a villain and a heavy before this. He got to play a good guy. And for him, like this opened his career to a zillion things.
Well, it's weird. It's weird because we keep referring to these folks as, either good guys or villains when they're not really either. I mean, you do have to put your mind in the context of, yes, these are criminals. They have hurt people, whether physically or, robbing them or whatever. They've done things to get into this system, except maybe, drunkenly taking the tops off of parking meters. I don't know how that gets you 2 years unless they want to make examples of people or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what I did love about, and this is something you brought up, Jeff, is Dragline, George Kennedy's character, is a different person at the end of this movie, which again brings me back to Rebel Without a Cause. These teenagers in that movie are completely lost because they don't have functional home family lives. They don't have sort of, I'll go back to that cliche, but male role models to tell them how to be men, or particularly matronly role models to teach them how to be women and navigate the world. None of these guys seem to have had father figures who are around or willing to teach them anything. All they had is the state and Strother Martin's captain to kind of like whip them and put them in the box if they get out of line and all that stuff, where you've got Cool Hand Luke who comes in and he's a stoic. He's not, doesn't kind of give in to those animalistic instincts. When he says he's going to do something, he does it, whether that's escaping or eating 50 eggs. He's got every chance to, and the rule, he's such an adherent to the rules, ironically, his own code, that, you know, it's established that if he throws up, he loses the bet, and he holds them all down.
Yeah, it's a, I mean, by
hard to watch that
standards,
scene in some respects.
It's
I mean,
hard.
Last night I had a stomach ache. I watched that scene.
From watching,
it did not end well. Yeah,
it counts as a cartoonish scene probably by today's standards, but it's one of those, like, you try to eat 10 eggs, let alone 50. Like, throw down, buddy. But again, that shows, like, just, it's such a great rallying scene, and I get why it's part of the way this movie is celebrated, because, like, it's, I mean, the boxing is like, hey, that guy's tough. He can win some respect around here. Like, just see Dragline kind of, you know, take Paul Newman back, or take Luke back in. But the egg, like the egg thing is him at his fullest power, in terms of, like, now Dragline's fronting for me as my little fence for this bet, and we're gonna pull this down. I got my cheerleading squad on one side, you got your bettors and cheerleading squad on the other, and I'm still gonna win, and I'm gonna call my shot to do it. Like, it's the peak of the movie for what his character is and will turn out to be for those men around there. But you're right, like, with the cast of people here, like, obviously everyone's a bad apple because they're in prison, but no one's a rotten apple, so to speak. Like, no one's an absolute, among the prisoners, that is, the cons. No one's a twitchy, murderous motherfucker. Like, we get that one at the end of Shawshank Redemption, which, you know, ruins the movie and like makes us realize, wait, these are some really evil people, not just hard luck guys. No one's in that. No one's in that role in this movie, and that's that way you can kind of rally behind everybody and Paul in terms of as a viewer. So,
one thing I wanted to call out before I forget, I noticed in the opening credits, I thought, oh, this is quite a coincidence. There's an actor named Dean Stanton. I wonder if he's, you know, any relation to Harry Dean Stanton. Turns out the same guy.
Yeah. Who still looks the same 78 years old that he looked the rest of his life. Yeah.
Yeah. He had
quite a few recognizable
old
character actors in there. J.D. Cannon from McCloud, and
Anthony
Ralph
Zerg.
Waite from the Waltons, and Lou Antonio from all kinds of things in the 60s and 70s. And
Denny
Hopper, as you already mentioned. Wayne Rogers was in it before he was Trapper John and MASH.
Okay, Dennis Hopper is another one. I keep bringing up Rebel Without a Cause. He was playing essentially the same character in that movie. Like,
Twitchy weirdo. Yeah,
but he doesn't, I don't think he says anything in either movie. He's just, you know, maybe has an incidental piece of dialogue where it's like you see his lips moving, but it's like in the background. But here, it's just,
I mean, he would blow up 2 years from now in Easy Rider. Like, that's his spot. That's his launching pad, right?
I didn't know Dennis Hopper was in the movie. Did he not have any dialogue?
I don't think he did. He was he was like one of the nameless. He was one of those characters where if he didn't become Dennis Hopper, he would have been like Stormtrooper number 6 on the Death Star right before it got blown up. But it's still fascinating. What I love about, one of the many things I love about this movie is, you know, they cast a lot of great, not only performers, but great faces. You know, everybody is really interesting to look at, and you kind of want to know what their story is. I'd follow any of these storylines. Mike, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just as a little bit of context, since I'm, you know, I like to sometimes play the old guy card here, but I did a podcast years ago that you might appreciate about how 1967 is generally regarded by a lot of film historians as the year that kind of changed film. And by that, I mean, it really sort of took that, which was very seldom put into movies before, and put them front and center. And it changed cinema, where you could have anti-heroes, you could have criminals, villains, bad people at the center of movies. I mean, just some of the movies that were big that year, and they all made money. They were all successful critically and commercially, like In the Heat of the Night, The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, In Cold Blood, Cool and Luke, of course. And even like comedies like The Producers. Mel Brooks won Best Original Screenplay that year for a movie that had the gall, less than 20 years after World War II, or a little more than that, I guess, 67, 22 years, to make fun of Hitler. I mean, that was considered, this was a scant 6 years after the judgment in Nuremberg, you know, where they first showed the rest of the world the films of the Nazi atrocities. So all these kind of rules were being broken. Nonconformity was kind of where it's at, you know, sort of black was white, left was right, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, again, the world was changing, and none more so than America, which is going through some crazy changes, and it set up Hollywood to have, I think you said earlier, the best really decade in the 70s by the time everybody was making these very unusual films. I mean, even thrillers and adventures like 3 Days of the Condor or The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Right.
I mean, Walter Matthau as the hero, and in the 80s we were only putting in people who had pectorals in separate zip codes. I mean, that's unbelievable, and yet it worked like gangbusters. And all this kind of unconventionality was really incredible. But that was kind of the year, and Cool Hand Luke was right at the cutting edge of it, of sort of changing the way we looked at some of these things and could make mass entertainment out of it.
Yeah. And I got to second Jeff. Like, the best picture lineup that year was loaded. It's In the Heat of the Night 1, Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and The Lowly Dr. Dolittle. Like, Cool Hand Luke,
that was the only nod to old Hollywood.
Right. But like the Cool Hand Luke, like, just couldn't even make that top 5. And then you get the best actor, and obviously Steiger won for In the Heat of the Night, but it's Steiger, it's Warren Beatty, it's Dustin Hoffman, it's Paul Newman, and a posthumous Spencer Tracy. That's a murderer's row at the Oscars. And like
Don,
Jeff
they
said,
couldn't even nominate Sidney Poitier, who had not only In the Heat of the Night that year, but he probably canceled himself out because he had To Sir with Love, which was also a very unconventional, sort of unusual movie.
I keep forgetting one more. Dirty Dozen was this year.
That's
like,
right.
Just Barefoot in the Park was this year.
Yeah.
You've got crazy movies this year. Like, I'll put 67 against, I think, what people put 69 behind the list. I'll take 67. So,
well, I'm always about 69, but since we're talking about movies,
I'm telling you, you got to record before we start air, because all the zingers were before the show.
Wow. I think we should have a drinking game. Too bad I just have water. But
bring it.
But the one thing before I get back to you, Mike, the thing that stands out about these movies, not only the ones from 67, which I have not seen nearly as many as I should have, but also I'm thinking about 68, 69, where you do see the rise of the anti-hero. I don't know, and I'm sure this has been written about, maybe you guys have talked about this, but I'm just kind of putting it out there. There seems to be a lot of messaging, especially in these really iconic movies, where you've got the anti-heroes who make going against society really attractive and fun and cool. You've got Bonnie and Clyde, Cool Hand Luke, Easy Rider, Adventures, Cuckoo's Nest, but that was in the 70s.
Right.
What do these all have in common? Right, but what do we have in common here?
I know what
the anti-heroes end up dead at the end.
Correct.
Crushed, the shot, lobotomized.
The old men still win. The old white guys still win. Where old Hollywood, who makes these movies,
better movies.
Yeah,
but that's also the commentary of the time, because even though we had lots of rebels with a great cause, everybody from JFK to RFK to Martin Luther and Malcolm X and all kinds of people like that.
Martin Luther King. Martin Luther was much earlier. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just saying I meant Martin Luther King. Sorry, pardon me. Although, no. Sorry, yeah. So I think it was reflecting that. It was really sort of rejecting the authoritarian sort of mindset that had governed America for so long and told them that this is how it is. This is what you go with. This is, and we started questioning, the young people being shipped over to Vietnam, the race riots, and some of those crazy things that were going on. Women having to march for basic rights, voting and otherwise, things like that. And just interracial marriage was still outlawed in most of the South up until the mid 70s. I mean, just things like that. So I think there was this like, hey, we're not in that world anymore. And yeah, I think you're right. The anti-hero was sort of an easy way to do it. And of course they don't win. But ultimately, I think the audience was starting to be swayed to those better and more open-minded ways of thinking. Just as I think both in some respects, the chain gang here, as well as the authorities, have to sort of recognize what Luke was doing to say, this system isn't very good.
Well, but I'm just good. Sorry, Don.
No, it took these movies probably made by a little bit of the old guard who would at least poke the bear. Movies like we're talking about now, but it took the young, I hate to say it like this, but the younger people to start making the movies. Like Mike Nichols was super young making The Graduate, and then all those mavericks of the 70s who are like, hey, we just had a decade where we poked the bear and all of our heroes lost. let's make a decade where sometimes our heroes win. And
Right.
win dirty, win bad, but you know what? Win,
Mhm.
because we
Mhm.
needed a win, and we didn't win Vietnam, so we need to win now. And it turned into a decade of that, and then 80s excess and 90s softness. Because I love what Mike said earlier about like putting this as a double feature with Shawshank Redemption. Just the sensibility differences
Oh
of
yeah.
eras is crazy. Because
Yeah, that
we're
one's
living in the
so
heyday
enough to
90s
sit
of like
and-
Clinton era success, but let's make a nostalgic older story versus this thing, which is cut like a razor. So, oof, yeah.
Well, it's just, yeah, it's strange because I don't know exactly what this means, but you do have the people, they're the people financing the movies,
Yeah.
the people making the movies, and the people watching the movies. People watching the movies, because another thing I'm watching right now, I'm in the middle of it, is Scarface by Brian De Palma,
Mhm.
which is, the peak commentary on 80s excess. But it's also, I don't know if it's so much the case now, but years ago I used to hear about it was very big amongst like rap culture, and Tony Montana,
Mhm.
Al Pacino's character was a big,
Living large.
yeah, big icon of like the guns and the coke and the women and all this other stuff. But failing to see, it's like everybody who watched that movie didn't make it to the end to see
Yeah.
what happened to Tony
They
Montana.
didn't
Right.
understand his downfall. And
It's like when Nixon said that Patton was his favorite year in 1970, and George C. Scott quipped, "I hope he didn't see Dr. Strangelove," because he kind of misinterpreted it. Patton
Well,
wasn't really the hero of that movie, although he did some heroic things. But ultimately, that was a very anti-war movie, even though it was
Yeah.
kind of telling a somewhat good story about us in World War II, but not that man.
Right. Well, I mean, but that's sort of the thing, is like the people who are kind of idolizing these romantic, larger than life figures. Let's take it back to Cool Hand Luke. Let's take
Right.
it back to McMurphy, or even Bonnie and Clyde, or even the Graduate. They don't die at the end of that picture, but they do kind of break free of all the expectations and the restraints of the system.
Right.
And that last shot on the butt is like the bus is like,
Then,
okay,
like,
What did
we
we
did
just
what we
do?
want. Now
Did we
what do
win?
do? Do we even like each other? It
Yeah.
was kind of cool to like
Yeah.
stick our middle fingers up at our families, but now what? But so the people who are making this film, these films, you can get the idea that they're subversive and also commercial. But is there some kind of like a meta message? A lot of these things were based on books, so maybe it's a
Right.
through line, which gets back to what's going on through the authors of this time period and their nihilism. But the idea of, let's put it out there that it's a good idea, it can be attractive to rebel, and it's a way to break free of
Right.
sort of programmed thinking and expectations. But in the end, there's a big risk because you're probably going to die or end up disenfranchised anyway. Like, it almost
Yeah.
seems cruel. Like, don't say, hey, fight this system, break out of it, it's going to be awesome, you're going to be a better person for it, but you end up dying early and horribly.
Well,
Well,
Mr. Smith doesn't really have any place in a country that in the 60s not only saw its president assassinated, but some of the great leaders all shot down too, and lied to us about wars and other things like that. I mean, all the way through to Watergate and some other stuff. I'm not suggesting that we're the only villains. There's many villains. I mean, obviously Hitler and Stalin and Mao and other
Sure.
people like that. However, America is sort of the great white hope and the great cowboy riding to save the world, as they did in a number of instances, and they still do a lot of that as far as charity and good things throughout the world, more so than any other country. But people weren't buying it fully, and I think that it was this. It's interesting. I think I love your interpretation, Ian, of the end of Graduate, because I think there's like, okay, we flipped the bird and we prevailed. Now it happens, but in some respects, that's kind of what I would say throwing off any kind of shackles or whatever you want to call it, enslavement is like, I know what I don't want. I'm not sure what I do want, but now it's up to me to decide what I want, as opposed to somebody decide it for me. And I think that's maybe the key victory in these movies versus necessarily if they die. It's like, again, not try to strain the Christian metaphor here, though it's been written about and talked about many times, but, Luke dies to sort of release these other prisoners from their own shackles in their own minds and sort of the way they're playing this game with the man. And, so in some respects he dies, but he makes the others a little more victorious, even in a small way, which in these instances was a lot.
It's true.
Well, I understand where you're coming from. I want to kind of disagree, and it comes back to something
Okay.
that Don had said earlier, which was it was only 2 years. Now, if you look
That's my nitpick. It's like,
but yeah.
dude, you
But
can
here's
make
the thing:
it.
there is a thematic tie-in to a lot
Yeah.
of these other movies we're talking about.
Right.
This idea of it's almost an immaturity in terms of the discussion of rebellion in a
True.
lot of
Mhm.
these movies,
Yep.
because it's sort of this black and white thing. You're either going to be part of the system or you have to break and rebel against the system, as
Right.
opposed to making the system work for you and guarding against your own corruption. I mean,
Like,
with The Graduate,
Yeah.
Ben could have gone into plastics, made
True.
all that money and
Yeah.
retired at 42
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
done whatever he wanted to do, or
Sure.
made all that money and just like gone camping on the weekends instead of, going to pool parties. Cool Hand Luke could have served his time, gotten out and been like, look, I learned a lot from these guys, which is I never want to spend time with them again, or the man with no eyes or any of that stuff. I'm going to go on the straight and narrow, or at least not, get hauled
Yeah.
into
Like,
the
hey
can.
guys,
Mm.
don't end
Right.
up where I ended up. Yeah.
Right. So
for
there
2
is
years.
almost this idea of like absolute freedom at any cost.
Yeah.
Or you could just be like, I'm gonna, do what I have to do to get by and express my freedoms in other ways that, because honestly, most people don't care that much. It's not a grand conspiracy to keep people down
Yeah.
necessarily. I guess it all depends on who you are and where you're at. But in terms of the average person, that's the thing, is like nobody really cares about you.
Well, I'll zoom this out to compare today. Like when we're talking about generational attitudes, look at today. Like
Yeah.
we're the 20-somethings and 30-somethings now, they're the participation award generation where like no one ever loses. And no one is ever going to lose this bad to the point of getting killed going on a 2-year stretch of prison, because the nonconformists they would never get this far, and two, they wouldn't die. Like, and we also are in an era where I hate to say it in a heroic movie fashion, but nobody dies. Okay, Iron Man maybe dies finally 3 movies in, but like we've had very stakeless movies where like the anti-authority movies of today, like The Social Network, like you have billionaires arguing with billionaires, how bad
That's
is
true.
life really going?
Yeah, what are the
versus-
stakes?
What are the stakes versus like what there's no story like this today of like, dude, a young kid doing the wrong thing that ends up in a prison camp. Like we don't have prisons like this. 2, we don't have quite the same justice as this, or the violence that's happening is likely to happen back where you are versus where you end up. Like, I mean, we have societal violence and we have societal problems, but it's not in our penal system anymore. It's out here before you get there. And that doesn't make the same attitude of movie as you could make then to now. It's weird.
And every
This
movie-
is a time capsule and a half of a movie. My God.
That's a great point. And I'm bringing all this up where we are kind of getting away from Cool Hand Luke the movie, but it's just because it brings up so many different kinds of questions about the time it was made versus like you're saying, like what are the people going to be writing about or talking about 60 years from now? Like you asked, who's the Cool Hand Luke for today? I don't know if we have one specifically for the reasons you're talking about. I mean, more Mike, I want to let you have the floor and talk about whatever you want, because we've been having this whole conversation, and I want to.
All right,
I've
I've been enjoying listening. No, it's great to see that kind of movie that is against the system, where it was those characters for a long period of time, because we did lose Vietnam, and we did not, and basically we were starting to have civil rights and become a part of the issue, and individuality, all of that's kind of seeping in. Now, when you see a movie today, it's always the hero wins, the good hero's tale, and he goes off and walks into the sunset. Back then, movies were a little more realistic about life, and it wasn't all just fantastical settings. There's, there is this problem with Hollywood today, where every movie has to be a fantasy instead of something being placed in reality. And here's a movie that actually places itself in reality and does not give you happy results in the end. And that's what makes it also more memorable, because when you have a sad ending compared to a happy ending, a sad ending is probably going to give you many times far more nuance than a happy one will, because you learn something from it in the end. I mean, that's the reason why The Empire Strikes Back is the most memorable Star Wars film, because our heroes didn't win at the end, and things weren't okay, and you're wondering, well, where do we go from here? You know, and of course with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, R.P. McMurphy gets lobotomized for basically freeing the men, and for freeing everyone else. What does Cool Hand Luke get? He gets shot. You know, is it Luke Jackson, or were we just guessing?
It's Jackson, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, and that's it, the interesting thing, and the cruel thing about this is, at the end of Cuckoo's Nest, Chief comes to, he basically suffocates McMurphy when he realizes that he's been lobotomized. At the end of this, they send Dragline into this church, again, church, religious imagery, to kind of talk Luke out of it. And Luke turns to the cops, kind of yelling out the stained glass window, "What we have here is a failure to communicate," and then he gets shot in the neck. Now, it doesn't kill him. They throw him in the back of this car, and the captain is like, "Okay, now we're going to drive him back to the camp." And the other authorities that have been wrangled, like the local people, have been called out by the not State Farm, that's Farmers Insurance.
Jake called him.
No,
yeah, got it.
Yeah, Jake from State Farm. That's sell out.
You broke out again, guys.
He doesn't like his policy one bit. Not a good policy.
Well, suffice it to say, I know this is a different reference, but Luke was not in good hands when he got shoved in the back of that car, because the one cop or someone was like, "Okay, we can get him to the hospital, like right up the road," and like, "No, we're just going to take him back to where he came from." Like, but that's an hour. He's not going to make it.
That's what kills him.
Right. And
Correct.
So he's still alive when we last see him, and he's kind of resigned to the fact that, yep, this is how I'm going to go. It's an odd kind of death, because we don't see him die on screen. We just know that it's inevitable. That's what's going to happen.
But in some respects, I would suggest that, again, that is the sort of main thing that happens. But to Mike's point about nuance and stuff like that, it's a very unhappy ending. But within that happy ending is, of course, the sunglasses get hit by a Dragline, and then Dragline is kind of the new Luke, who's really kind of now earned it more than just his brawn and ability to knock every other man down in the yard. And they've crushed authority, and it's never going to quite be the same way. And that guy's dragged away, kind of cowering jelly. Probably never really going to recover from her, because he's all image and not really, without the gun and without the state behind him, he's not as tough as Lucas, who's willing to say fuck off by quoting the captain's famous line back to him as his final words. The interesting thing, and I love these kind of discussions about it. Again, context is kind of everything. I think one of the reasons that this movie is so well regarded, beyond Conrad Hall's brilliant photography, I mean, you can feel the sweat in that. I mean, you feel like it's a good thing we're watching that when it's still 40 degrees out, because it's like, oh my God, in the summer that must have been excruciating. Or the fact that you said earlier, all the supporting characters, just like in Cuckoo's Nest, become very distinctive, even though we maybe want to think less of them originally, because they're not desirables, et cetera, et cetera. As well as, Schifrin's score, which was nominated, and kind of a revolutionary score in its way, and very moving and emotional as well. But that context was, this is a couple years after something like 65% of people, the first time they read the Warren Commission in 65, rejected it. The people were already saying, you know what? I don't believe what bullshit I'm being told here.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the man. They're lying to me. They're not helping me. This stuff I read about what's going on in Birmingham with the hoses and what they're doing this, there, and that. People were just mad as hell. And young people, of course, their time was probably short in this world if they were having a draft card in their wallet. And I think that, to your point, Ian, it seems, or Don, to the original point about 2 years seems silly, but I think it's almost a representation of youth. Like, here's before they turn into the guy who can, go into plastics and retire at 42. They were never even sure they were going to have that time, or maybe the iron was hot and they were full of verve and young enough to really get mad. That kind of became it. And I think in some respects, even though Newman was probably in his 30s here, he represents that kind of youthful anger and frustration.
That's why I called it Podunk Vortex. I was like, these guys don't look like they have much past or much future, and they don't represent some grand, bigger place or thing. They're just in Florida, living where they're living. They don't like you said with other heroes who are, like represent a bigger city, a bigger place, a bigger cause. You know, like I keep thinking of this movie right now where it's John Boyega, the bank robbing movie from a year or two
Oh
called
yeah,
Breaking, where like that's obviously a dude gets shot in the end, but that's the hero of that movie is still labeled with PTSD, labeled with anxiety, like he has to have quirks instead of perfections, like Newman does, and like just again the depiction of heroes and the character creation of heroes is completely different, and obviously we're fighting different causes, like the Breaking movie, like the bank robbers on the news. There's news coverage of like, look at this guy trying to defend what he's doing just to get his VA check. There's no news crews. There's no obituary in the paper for Luke Jackson. Like he lives in the hearts of these cons, and that's it.
Yeah.
Blip in the radar of life. Yeah.
Well, there's
a movie movies today would make a bigger platform about all this with the characters.
And I want to get back to that too, because
sorry.
we're kind of talking. No, I'm all these. You guys keep throwing these things out, and I'm like, my
Sorry.
brain is lighting up like a pinball machine. I'm like,
You need 2 hours, Ian. 2 hours.
No, I gotta go watch some bad reality TV shows.
Oh,
but okay, youth, Jeff. I think you lit something up in me. This idea, and Don. I wonder if this changes the context at all, because we're saying it's only 2 years. If you think about the idea of these people being kind of immature, like when you're a kid, you're thinking, I got 2 years left of high school. Oh my God, it's just going to take forever and I hate it. But when you're an adult, you're like, I barely remember high school. Like it's so inconsequential, unless you had something like a bullying experience or your first love or whatever. It really sticks with you. It's easy to forget when you get older. So for us looking in at that and be like, you can just keep your head down, don't get thrown in the hole. You can play cards and drink and whatever and hang, maybe make some new friends. You got to work 12 hours a day, getting buff out in the sun, but whatever. They're thinking every day out on that road feels like a month. So the whole like time perspective. But the other thing,
if you're 35, that's years of your real life, not your youth.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
These are men, not boys out there. Right.
And they kind of established that he's been there before. He knows how to kind of screw around with this prison system. Because was that really the first time he got arrested? He was pretty easygoing about it.
I don't know if that was I don't know if he'd been there before. I
get
the feeling he'd been in trouble with the law before. I don't know about the whole work camp thing.
Right.
But the one thing I wanted to also talk about is, we were discussing modern movies and how everything is, kind of action and comic books and franchises and stuff. I think and we're maybe starting to see that on a bit of a downturn, hopefully, is because it's what makes money. You talk about looking at movies in the 60s and the 70s, and you have all these great counterculture, big studio epics, like movies that go against the very foundations of what they stand for in a lot of cases. They're putting them out and they're making money hand over fist and establishing these kind of cultural icons that resonate and echo throughout the decades, is because that's what was popular. I don't think it's so much like we can't make movies like this nowadays. I just don't think there's a popular appetite, for it, especially because of now what we've been through in the last 3 years and the last 8 years, or however far you want to go back. Escapism really is the key. So yes, we want fantasy, we want other realms, anything but what's going on in the here and now, except for our streaming shows, which is really kind of strange.
Well, it's a reflection of the need for escapism, just like the era of the Depression in the 30s made Astaire and Rogers and their hoity-toity New York apartment comedies such a refreshing change, because it took them out of their world for a while. And maybe when the history books are written, they'll see some of that as maybe the popularity of superheroes, like somehow somebody does save us when we don't think sort of any institution can. I don't know, but it's an interesting question, because I also think the analogy to the movies of the 60s and 70s is the music. That gave rise to folk music and political protest songs, and people who were totally counterculture, and that really worked all the way until just like when disco came in. Suddenly it seemed like it was very much manufactured to make money and get people to feel groovy and dance. But you think about all the kind of revolutionary music that was done in that time period too. I think people were just they were antsy and they were suddenly really questioning things that for centuries they had not really questioned, and suddenly now it was all in the forefront for them to really doubt. And miraculously, they did a lot of great music and movies and shows about that.
Definitely. I think you're right, Jeff. We could do another hour on this. I'm going to leave that for the more 19. I want to talk about more 1967 movies, because listening to you guys, talk about these great films, many of which I have not seen, I feel I'm at a deficit. But so look for that at some point in the future. But Mike, I want to give you the last word on Cool Hand Luke.
Oh, are we ever going to get more movies like this again? I really do. Like you said, I'm kind of hoping the comic book movie trend dies, which it won't.
Yeah.
It won't. It's too popular.
But
it'll.
I'm with you.
Nothing lasts forever.
Yeah. But if a generation at some point getting fed the same sugar can stand up and go, hey, no one's really talking about what we're doing right now and everything else that's happening. I'm waiting for every generation has one, a pushback movie to the norm. I mean, we made it through the Trumpian America, but at the same time, what's the pushback movie? Was it Moonlight? A Cool Hand Luke for this generation, or at least this decade, is coming. It's not here yet, but I wonder what that movie is, and I dare Hollywood to make it.
Yeah, because
it also may be on television. I think television with the longer form is where the edgier, some kind of, sort of the end. I mean, you think about like Walter White in Breaking Bad and Tony Soprano and Dexter Morgan,
great
and
example,
Don Draper, and even continuing today. I mean, there's a great show that just dropped on Netflix called The Diplomat, which is very, very much about people saying, I may be in the system, but this system is screwed. Or look at Succession. I mean, I think that's an example of a whole family of anti-heroes. So, it'd be nice if the movies could find a way to do it in 2.5 hours again. But if they can't, I think TV long form or miniseries form is answering some of that.
And the TV long form is great, but it's such a commitment to see a show, compared to a movie. And there's so many different flavors you can get with film than you can with television.
Right. And I think, but part of it is, a lot of the shows that you just kind of rattled off there are, 15, years old at this point, or sometimes older.
It's been out a bit.
Yeah, that's right.
And Sopranos and all that. And I think that's partly because they got in just before streaming, where now you've got all of these different networks and services putting out all of this content. Well, not for long, given what's going on this week with the writer's strike. But the point is, I think movies, it's easier to break through and say, this is the zeitgeist, this is something you can hold on to, rather than, oh, did you see all 17 seasons of?
And there's so many channels and everything else now. But I mean, I think it continues, and I think those shows, you're right, they're 10, 15 years old now, but they set a template. I mean, Mayor of Easttown, I think some other shows that are coming out that are doing that. I mean, the Diplomat is very, very cynical. It's like a combination of The West Wing and a sort of bittersweet romantic comedy in a way. And it got renewed for a second season on its second day because it got so many people watching it. So I think there is a hunger, to your point, Mike, about some of that kind of stuff. And I think they do have, some of them are comedies, some of them are dramas, some of them are thrillers. So I think there are those colors, just better characterization and maybe edgier writing. But to your original question and query is like, why can't films do it? Let's get back to that, because there's got to be more stuff to get people into, especially adults, into the movie theaters, other than just, those sort of century cinema artsy fartsy movies. I mean, I love those. Don't get me wrong. God love them. But these were mainstream hits. I mean, In Cold Blood was a big bestseller. It was a big, nasty movie, and it was horrifying. It still is, watching it today, and it was a big hit. And it's
we
like,
don't do those.
We could handle that in 67.
That's 50 Shades of Grey was the last blockbuster, take America by storm book turned into a movie. Everything else is IP. It's comic. It's like, what's the last big, software?
It took them 50 years to get
like Bridges Mass.
Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
Huge movie, but
50 years to get that on the screen.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're doing another Hunger Games, though. That counts, right?
With
come on,
with Maria from West Side Story.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Can't wait.
No more.
Oh, I can wait.
Maybe it'll be the
Battle
two-part.
Royale.
Maybe it'll be the
Hunger
two-part
Games
version
are.
of Wicked.
But that won't.
I'm
like,
kidding.
That's not
Ian,
firebrand
I just wanted to see
generation.
you
Yeah.
make that face.
I'm ending the show.
All right.
Not
Fair
not
Oh,
not the
you're gonna blame
episode,
me
the
for that.
podcast. No,
You're going to blame that on me.
no. All right. So as we wind things down, first of all, thanks for another great discussion. It goes to show that we don't have to just talk about current blockbuster movies. We can go back into the vault and find some real treasures. But I do have a couple of things I want to kind of wind down with. One is next week on Wednesday night, we'll be back here talking about a comic book movie. Guardians of the
He's
Galaxy
back!
Volume 3. Yes, it's my big return to, well, it might be the quickest return in history because, I don't
You'll
know.
see.
I'm looking at the rest of the landscape and the Flash. Anyhow,
You'll
so
see.
yeah, we'll be talking about this 8:00 next Wednesday. And tomorrow night begins the 10th Chicago Critics Film Festival, which is going to be going on at the Music Box Theater here in lovely Chicago. Got a great lineup of feature films, shorts, programs, guests, including, because it's Star Wars Day, I want to mention there's a documentary which I have not seen, but I'm eager to see it. It's going to be premiering at the festival on Saturday night. It's the midnight show. It is called A Disturbance in the Force, which is about the making of the 1978 Star Wars Holiday Special.
All right.
Yeah, so coming out for that,
I
the
remember that
tickets.
too.
Well, I've
They-
never actually
they also
seen
did
the
one of
Star Wars
ET
Holiday
like that.
Special.
They
Oh,
did a
you
big
should write a passage.
special
You need
about
to.
ET
Saw
one
it
time
on,
too.
saw it on TV when it aired.
So bad.
Yeah.
Wait, there was an ET Holiday
Whoa.
Special?
It wasn't a holiday special, but it was so popular. They did a sort of varietal hour of it with special scenes and skits and some songs. And oh my God, it was. I mean, remember, Neil Diamond wrote the song "Heartlight" because he was so taken with ET.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
And cocaine,
Zeitgeist.
apparently. I'm only
You're not
alleging.
wrong.
I'm not accusing. Okay, so, but yeah, so tickets and showtimes for the Chicago Critics Film Festival. I'll have the link down in the description, along with links to all my lovely and talented guests for tonight. We got Mike Crowley of YPA Reviews. We got Don Shanahan of Film Obsessive, Jeff York of The Establishing Shot, and me, Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. Please like and subscribe to not only this channel and this live stream, this episode, but also to everything that follow these guys. They're great, along with the rest of Earth's Mightiest Critics, some of whom couldn't be here tonight, although that would have been like a really huge panel. but we got a lot of dynamite packed in tonight. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for another lovely, informative, and fun live stream. And with this, I'm going to say I can and will, over the course of my lifetime, eat 50 eggs.